Well, let's go straight to those inflation numbers, which lifted sharply to 3.2% for the year to September, compared with 2.1% in the year to the end of June.
We have made it clear that we want to make more progress on inflation. We've made it very clear that progress often isn't in a straight line, as we've seen around the world. We know that there's more work to do, and that's our focus.
And there's no two ways about it. The cause of the inflation is energy prices. The RBA says there was an annual increase of electricity of 23.6% in the year to September. This is largely due, it says, to the end of energy rebates. $1,000 in Queensland, $400 in WA, $250 in Tasmania. The Commonwealth Energy Bill Relief Fund rebates, they were expended 6 months from July this year to the end of December, so they've got to come off. Even so, without any bill relief effect, electricity prices would even have risen on average by 5.9% in the past year. The Reserve Bank, of course, looks at the trim mean inflation, which strips out short-term or one-off effects. That rate also jumped sharply from 2.7 to 3%, and that puts inflation just outside the Reserve Bank's preferred band of certainty for interest rate cuts. Last night at the Australian Business Economist's annual dinner, the Reserve Bank Governor, Michelle Bullock, was asked about today's quarterly trim mean inflation rate and what would be considered a material forecast miss. Have a listen.
If you ended up with, say, 30 basis point, that for me would be a reasonably material miss. So our forecast for was 0.6, I think, wasn't it, for September quarter? Yeah, in the August statement on monetary policy. And so if it came in at a 0.9, I think that would be quite a material miss.
So a miss, she says, was 0.9% today, but the rate came in more than that, at 1%. In the RBA's governor's own word, a material forecast miss, which seemingly takes near-term interest rate cuts right off the table. As Ed showed, the markets had an immediate reaction to the inflation rates. Before the number dropped, the markets assessed there was a 41% chance of a rate cut next Tuesday. Now, though, it's barely 10% of rates and a 90% chance of them being on hold. So let's bring in here one of Australia's most experienced economists, the ANZ Bank's chief economist, Richard Yetsenga. Richard, many thanks for your time. I mean, you heard the Reserve Bank Governor's own words last night saying that 0.9% was a miss. It's come in at even more than that. So really, this has taken interest rates or interest rate cuts off the table.
Look, it has for the meantime, but I think this number was expected to be, let's call it 0.9, and if you annualise it, somewhere between 3.5% and 4%, and that's still roughly what we got. So I don't think we should panic just because we got confirmation of that today, and if in fact the numbers were even a smidge on the high side of expectations. I think we're still left with a domestic picture which says overall the economy is in pretty good shape. The decline in inflation we had for 18 months or so has stalled, and we've got a bit of a drift up in the unemployment rate. So, look, I think it's still probably more beige than black or white, and certainly we're not ruling out further rate cuts. I mean, it seems unlikely we'll see anything before Christmas. Our expectation is we'll get one more cut in February, but I don't think I think we should be careful about viewing the world very discreetly as a before CPI number today and then thinking the world's dramatically different after 11:30.
So this also goes to show just how government, state and federal, their energy support for households basically disguised inflation over the past 12 months or so.
Well, they're your words. I mean, I think there's been an effort, there's a recognition that energy prices have been a source of tension, not just for households, but also for business. And governments have been trying to lean into that. And of course, things like subsidies often can be used in the short term to try and ameliorate the effects of things. But in the medium to long term, you need to get the supply-demand fundamentals right. And I think everyone would agree energy policy is an area of substantial focus in Australia, as it is in many other economies.
Okay, so if we have a look at this chart, you can see housing over the past year up 4.7%. Food prices over that same period up by 3.1%. These also are at the outer edge or beyond the Reserve Bank's expectation of where prices should be between 2 and 3%. And I know I've picked out two things there, but they're the things that households feel the most, no doubt, along with energy prices.
Yes, of course. But let's also understand what links our confidence
I'll tell you what, Richard, I'm going to jump in there. We've just lost your microphone just for the moment. So while you look through that, I'll go through a few other bits and pieces with that as well today. Let's go back and have a look at those numbers there as Richard sorts his microphone out. You can see there, you know, sort of, if you look at the food prices there, and we'll talk about that a little bit later with Woolworths in particular, its sales today. Now, the interesting thing about Woolworths is its prices during the past year have actually gone backwards. And that's largely because it's been trying to discount to try and get extra market sales. But look at those energy prices there, up by 23.6%. And the reason for that is largely as a result of those subsidies coming off. As I said, that was largely state government subsidies. So let's go there. I think Richard's back with me now. Richard, the other thing also about this is, oh, they're still testing that. I apologise for that. Here's the Australian dollar and where it's at. So the market did react almost immediately to what happened today with this inflation number. And this is, I guess, the surprise that was sitting there. 66 US cents. These are live numbers as we see them. We also saw it in 1 year bond yields as well. I've got Richard back now. Richard, thanks again. I apologise for that. Let's go to this whole issue.
Sorry about that, Ross.
Yes, the whole issue about the Reserve Bank. What does it tackle? Does it tackle first inflation and then the unemployment rate? Because the unemployment rate ticking up to 4.5% suggests it needs to cut interest rates. But now it's got an issue where inflation is rising as well.
Oh, look, I think you're looking for a recipe there which is too scientific. I think that the answer is the bank has a dual mandate. Ideally, what it does is it meets its inflation target, subject to, you know, also delivering some good outcomes on the labour market. At the moment, the inflation numbers are saying they can't move on rates. The labour market is saying, wow, if you could do anything, you know, we'd like rates to come down. I don't think that changes the equation for the bank, but does highlight that when you apply kind of more than one objective to a one instrument entity, you are going to face periods where it's going to be a little bit complex. And I think right now it is a little bit complex.
Okay, just one last thing. I noticed that, say, the Commonwealth Bank saying rate cuts are off the agenda at the moment. Others say, you seem to be a little bit more sanguine about it. What's your own forecast of where rates move in the future?
Look, we've got one more cut in our forecasts in February next year. What I'd suggest is people stand back a little bit and just say, look, the last year and a half I would characterise as a mid-cycle slowdown. It's not a recession and it's certainly not a boom. And in mid-cycle slowdowns, interest rates are tricky territory. You know, we haven't had an aggressive sequence of easings in Australia. For instance, we haven't had big 50-point easings. We've had kind of a Reserve Bank that's delivered easing as it's needed, as the evidence has accumulated. I don't think that broad story has changed. At the moment, we've got inflation saying the bank can't go soon, but we've got the labour market still saying, look, maybe there is some need eventually for the bank to move. So I've still got one more number.
Good stuff. Richard, always good to chat to you. Richard Yetsenga is the ANZ Bank's Chief Economist.